Now, when I got offered the new Honda Rebel 1100 for review, I was insistent that I got the DCT version. You see, on paper it looks like a decent bike, the Africa twin engine is brilliant, and it does have its own distinctive Honda styling, but really it's the dual clutch transmission option that truly sets it apart from other cruisers. Nobody else has it or even comes close. But then that begs the question, does it really belong here? Cruisers do tend to be a little bit more traditional, and so on top of all its other modernities, is DCT a step too far? In case you're not familiar, DCT basically gives the same effect as an automatic, but uses 2 sets of gears and 2 clutches, hence dual clutch transmission. One set of gears has 1st, 3rd and 5th, whilst the other has 2nd, 4th and 6th. One clutch lets off whilst the other engages, and the result should be a super smooth transition between gears.
I mean, really here you've got a cockpit unlike any other cruiser. On the right hand switchgear you've got a starter switch, and then you've got another switch beneath it that goes between drive and neutral. So obviously in neutral it's going nowhere. If you put it into drive it goes into gear, doesn't move until you actually twist the throttle, and then it'll edge forward. You can roll it back in drive as long as the throttle's closed, but obviously neutral stops you from accidentally setting off if you do accidentally give it a rev. Cruise control beneath it, which is great to see on a bike like this. And then you've also got this switch between automatic and manual. So in manual, the DCT is going to select the gear for you based on the current speed and revs. Put it in auto and you can use these flappy paddles over on the left hand switch gear. So you've got a minus button here and then a trigger on the back. So hit that plus trigger and it will go up through the gears, hit down and it will go down through the gears. No shifter peg, no clutch, no nothing. Also on this side, apart from the heated grips and indicators and hazards and headlight, you've got a select button and a mode button. There are 4 riding modes on this bike, so you've got standard and then a rain mode, a sport mode for a bit more spice, and then user configurable. Each of those affects the power delivery, the level of traction control intervention, the amount of engine braking, but also the responsiveness of the DCT box. In sport, for example, it'll hang on to the gears, it'll let the engine rev up a bit further so you're getting up towards that peak power figure. You know, out on the road it really is pretty good. It's not my first rodeo though when it comes to Honda's DCT system. Last year I borrowed the XADV, the Africa Twin Adventure Sport and the Goldwing, all of them with DCT, but I think the bike that it made the most sense to me on was the Goldwing. On the one hand, you know, keep it in rain mode or dial back the throttle response and you've got a very practical and usable bike around town and at lower speeds. On the motorway it's great as well, you know, as you go up and down the revs with the traffic sort of yo-yoing, it does take care of the gears for you and it does make that a little bit easier. But then when you hit a road like this, the Goldwing was surprisingly fun, just like this bike. Whoa! Woo! Stick it in sport mode or stick it in manual and you can hustle a bit. So I reckon a cruiser like this has sort of similar applications. You know, certainly there are going to be times where you want to just take it easy and cruise along. I think it'd also be a brilliant commuter. It's surprisingly small and agile and nimble for an 1100. But again, when you hit a road like this, you want something that's going to light your fire a bit. And I've been riding it around in sport mode today and my fire is certainly lit, especially for a cruiser. I mean, the Africa twin engine, it just has a bit more at the top than you might expect for this genre of bike. Everything's pretty good actually. The brakes are good, the ride is nice and firm. It's sort of like if you want a cruiser for the ergonomics, but without a lot of the shortcomings that are typical of that genre. The thing is though, in the comments of the previous videos I've made about DCT, there are a few common objections. One is this idea that it isn't as smooth as a manual box with a clutch. Now I'm sure there are plenty of scenarios in which slipping the clutch a bit will smooth things out, and yes, it doesn't always pick the exact right gear at the exact right time, but still I think a lot of that idea comes from the earlier versions of DCT, and it really is pretty refined. Honestly, if that's been putting you off trying one, I'd definitely think about having a go on a 2021 bike. The other is that they're difficult to ride at low speeds and do those tight maneuvers. And again, I think that moderate throttle response is something that they've been able to refine over time. I mean, I found this Rebel 1100 especially easy to get on with, given that all the weight is slung so low. But on top of that, you can always put it in rain mode or into user mode and dial back the throttle response. You can put it into manual mode and keep it in first or second so that it doesn't change gear on you. And much like all other bikes, you can drag a bit of rear brake. In fact, on the throttle, holding the rear brake, it really does feel pretty stable. Now, the third objection that I seem to read a lot is that it won't feel like riding an actual motorcycle, that you'll lose some of that satisfaction and the visceral connection with the engine. And I have to agree, it's a great feeling when you really gel with a bike and its gearbox. Nailing your upshifts and rev matching your downshifts, it really is super satisfying. But the thing is, riding around effectively without any gears does make for a very practical bike, and it's super smooth as it shifts up and down the box. No working the clutch in stop-start traffic, no stalling the bike at low revs, and I reckon for some people those benefits will be worth the trade-off.
So as you can tell, I'm pretty sold. Does this mean that it'll start grabbing sales from Harley and Indian though? Probably not. It really is quite a different experience to ride. But there are bikers out there, and plenty of you leave comments, that really dislike the nostalgia of retros and cruisers and would much prefer to have the most up-to-date and high-performing parts on their motorcycles. Most other large-capacity cruisers have a heavy dose of old-school styling and tech. The only exceptions I can think of are pretty expensive. And so that's where I think the Rebel fits in. If you fancy the comfort and easygoing ride of a cruiser position, but you want something that embraces its newness and you don't want to break the bank, then this bike, of course, should definitely be on the shortlist.